Long ago, so long now, that to those who remember it would seem like a dream, there was a young girl named Lindsay who needed a job. Now, everyone needs a job, of course. Lindsay knew this, but she also hadn't been hoping to need one so soon, and wasn't looking to take on many hours in between her classes. Sophomore year, college had really started to get hard for her. But with the prices of books, tuition, gas, insurance, and everything else, the scant grants and scholarships she had gleaned were starting to scrape thin. It was this or start taking out student loans. Lindsay figured she would try working first. Now, everyone she knew with any work experience told her the same thing. The first job you get always seems to suck. But she didn't want something she absolutely hated. She filled out applications from almost as many businesses as she had time to run into, and even asked a handful that hadn't been hiring. But in the end, she'd throw out the applications for fast food places and turn the rest in the following day. She went through classes with a stone in her belly. She waited for word back. 2 days later, her phone went off in the middle of class. When she called the unrecognized number back, she was greeted by an inorganically cheerful male voice, whose owner identified himself as Todd, a customer service rep that worked at Walmart, a department store where she'd turned in a job application. A grin crept over her face. She was told what time to show up for her job interview. Now, a job at Walmart was definitely in the preferred pile, though not her first choice. Lindsay had heard from a girl that she had been in a study group with for Trig, who had worked at the store, that Walmart offered flexible hours, and that the job was pretty laid back as long as you didn't end up working the register too often. A low-stress job with flexible hours was pretty much all Lindsay was looking for, and Walmart had been the only callback she'd gotten. The stone in her belly quickly twisted itself into a knot. She brooded carefully over what she would wear to the interview, how she'd do her hair and her makeup. She tried on 3 different outfits, conducting mock interviews in the mirror that hung on the closet door with each one. Though she didn't feel ready, she felt as ready as she would get, and had decided on what she would wear. She showed up to Walmart a good 7 minutes before her interview was scheduled. As she walked from her car across the mercilessly hot blacktop parking lot, Lindsay could feel sweat breaking out under her armpits and across her back, and prayed that it wouldn't be enough to show. The doors to the superstore slid automatically open as she approached, and she was drenched with cool air that engulfed her in the smell of fresh clothes and floor wax. Once inside, she headed to the customer service desk where she had handed the application in a few days prior, her pumps tapping slightly against the linoleum floor. A girl about her age was behind the counter, attention drawn downwards by a cell phone. Lindsay squinted her eyes at the girl's blue name tag, which was labeled Rachel. "Excuse me," Lindsay said in her best "I'm a professional, you're a professional, we're both professionals" voice. The girl looked up with an instantly splashed-on smile. Lindsay told her about her interview with Todd at 2:30. The girl's smile changed a little. She told her that Todd wasn't in yet. "But if you don't mind waiting, though, I'm sure he won't be long," the girl grinned. She was led behind the counter and down a stark white hallway, dirtied with black scuff marks, into a small office that was done in the same white monochrome, where she was ushered to sit. The girl left Lindsay sitting across from the only furnishing in the room, a dark desk that was bare save for a few coffee stains, and then went back to her post. Presumably. Looking at the unimaginative, utilitarian room, Lindsay was filled with dread at the days and days worth of boredom waiting to inch into her life. She only had to wait a few moments before he came into the room. He wore the standard assistant manager ensemble, a pair of black dickies, a blue button-up, and a tight grin. He wasn't an old man, but he looked like he'd been working there a little too long. His black hair was greasy and had the don't-stay-in-place attitude that looked like a home cut. "You must be Todd," she said as he crossed the desk and sat facing her. He stuck her hand out as she did so, introducing herself. "It's a pleasure to meet you," he said in a firm voice, licking his lips and meeting her in a handshake. Without delving into small talk, the man started to review her, asking her to repeat the information that she had already inked down onto the application, and then quizzing her on how she would react to different customer problems that she could end up facing. Though he moved through the questions quickly, the interview wasn't what Lindsay had been expecting, and it rapidly dawned on her what was off. Todd's eyes stayed trained on hers, his gaze unwavering, and each time she spoke, his tongue would flick out and over his thin lips, one after the other. Lindsay began to shift uncomfortably in her seat each time the pinkish probe would appear. after the 6th question or so. While Lindsay was explaining exactly how she would refer a troubled customer up the chain of command, while still keeping a friendly and helpful attitude, he simply stood up, stopped regarding her, and left the room. Lindsay sat dumbfounded, wondering if the interview was over. She felt a stew of embarrassment and anger starting to rise in her middle, and water starting to swell up in her eyes, as the door swung open again. A different man walked into the room. His face was a little fresher, his chestnut hair a little cleaner, but he was another assistant manager by the look of his outfit. "Hi, I'm Todd. You must be Lindsay," he said as he sat across from her. And then when he saw the moisture welling in her eyes and the change that came over her face as he spoke, he quickly asked if she was okay. No one could remember the man who interviewed Lindsay, nor did anyone know who he was. The picture the police were able to pull from the surveillance wasn't much help, but after she reluctantly went to the station, Lindsay was able to provide a composite sketch. The police didn't end up having to search for very long, though. That same night, the man, who turned out to be a sex offender on parole, went to Lindsay's house where, as he was sneaking into her backyard, he was caught by a cruiser stationed on a patrol around her house. The arresting officers found on his person a box cutter, gloves, a condom, and a ski mask. This horrible creep is released under Creative Commons license, attribution non-commercial, no derivative, which means that you can share it or copy it, but you can't change it, and you can't try to make a profit off of it.